Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now today I want to talk about what an emergency fund is and how much of an emergency fund you should have. Firstly, my name is Jodie. I've worked in personal finance, or commercial finance should I say, for the last 10 years in London. I'm originally from Ireland, that's what this accent is. And I decided to create a channel, so I am super new. So please subscribe if you really want to learn about personal finance, how to save more money, how to get a little bit of money on the side, like side hustle information, and basically just how to be better with your personal finance and to feel like you can be a lot wealthier based on the salary that you have. So let's kick things off. So an emergency fund, what is it? It kind of says exactly what it says in the tin basically. An emergency fund is a pot of money that you only use for emergencies. So what that could be is, let's say for example, your car breaks down or you have a leak in your apartment and you need money like right away, have access to it to either fix your car, to get a mechanic around, to get a plumber around to fix that emergency. That is what an emergency fund is. Now, an emergency fund can also be something that you have to live off. If a big emergency happens, like let's say you lose your job, you become redundant, the rug gets pulled from under you and you have to pay your mortgage and you need money but you don't have a salary coming in. This is what emergency funds can help with also. So they're incredibly important. And a lot of people, really don't like to think about those worst case scenarios of losing their job, but it does happen, unfortunately. And if, unfortunately you lose your job, you're going to be so stressed out anyway that you don't want to have to think about, oh my God, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay for groceries? If you've got kids, how are you going to, fend for them and make sure they're eating and able to get to school? And if you don't have a car, and there's so many stressful things that will be happening that will be going through your mind if you happen to lose your job, for example, or if your marriage dissolves. Let's say, for example, you are married and things happen, relationships break down. If you were financially dependent on someone else and now all of a sudden you don't have money anymore, let's say you're stay-at-home mom, and maybe you don't have a salary anyway and you get broken apart. If you don't have an emergency pot of money or your own, way of making income, it makes your life incredibly difficult, especially when there's kids involved. It's just a whole other layer when there's kids involved as well. So an emergency fund is really serious, and so many people don't have it. I know in America, a lot of people, the statistics are really high on the amount of people that live paycheck to paycheck. And I know in the UK as well, inflation has gotten out of control lately. It has calmed down recently. It's gone more to 2 to 3% now, inflation. But it was up to, nearly 14% inflation a few months ago. So if your daily items that you usually buy in a grocery store or any shop have gone up in price and, you're really, freaking out that you won't be able to afford to have food, it's really important to have an emergency pot of money if you fall into dire times, because life is expensive and you really don't know what's around the corner. So you might be asking, okay, an emergency fund is very important, Jodie. You need to have a pot of money, but where is the best place to keep it? So the best place to keep it is definitely in a separate savings account. So all of us here will have a current account. Don't ever keep your emergency fund in your current account because that will be too much of a temptation to spend it elsewhere. So if you have £1,000, let's say, of an emergency pot, create a new savings account, preferably a high yield savings account that gives you access to the money 24/7 whenever you might need it. Don't have a fixed rate account where you have to lock in the money for a few years to get a better interest rate, because the point of an emergency fund is to have quick access to it at any time, whenever you might have an emergency. So definitely have an easy access one, high yield savings account. At the moment in the UK anyway, my high yield savings account is about 4%. The interest rates are changing quite a lot, but mine is at 4%. So it's okay. It was definitely better a few months ago, but obviously the interest rates have dropped now a little bit, which is better for loans and mortgages and stuff. But yes, have it in a separate savings account. Don't have it in your current account. It's really important to have it separate so you're not tempted to spend it in any other way. Now, how much money should you have in your emergency fund? I get this question a lot by people, even when we're just talking about personal finance, and you hear a lot of different numbers floating about. But if you are starting from absolutely zero and you don't have any money at all and you want to get an emergency funds sorted, the best thing I think to do is to have a little goal of reaching £1,000. Because if you try from the get-go to try and save loads and loads and loads more, it might seem incredibly overwhelming. And especially if you're starting from the start and maybe you're on a lower salary, you might seem like, okay, if I'm trying to reach £10,000 of an emergency pot, I might just never start. So I think the first thing to do is try and get to £1,000 as a goal for yourself. Some people might be able to do this in a couple of months if they've got a decent salary. Some people it might take a few more months, but definitely without a doubt, try and get to £1,000 at first. Now that is not a lot of money. I'm just saying if you were just starting out, that's a good goal, a psychological goal to reach that point. Honestly, if your car breaks down, that might swallow up the majority of £1,000. You know, if you lose your job tomorrow, is £1,000 enough to pay your rent, your food, your living expenses? No, it's not, most likely, depending on the part of the world you live in. So honestly, what I think most people need is a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. So once you've reached £1,000, you 100% need to get to 3 to 6 months of living expenses into your emergency fund. And what I mean by living expenses, I mean your rent, your mortgage, your groceries, all of your needs that need to be met and paid for. But also, it also means if you've any big loans, you know, that are taken out, let's say for a car, if that's £200 a month, you have to incorporate that amount in as well. Or if you've any minimum payments on credit cards as well. So let's say, for example, it costs you £2,000 a month to live off, okay? I'm not talking going out to restaurants, I'm not talking about buying clothes or holidays, I'm talking just to live off, rent, groceries, getting to work, you know, your basics, okay? If that costs £2,000, a 3 month emergency fund will be 2 by 3, which is 6, or a 6 month emergency fund, which is what I have saved up, which I think is really important to have a 6 month one if you can get to it, is the goal for most people. Where it gets to a higher state is if you own your own business. What they tend to say is to have 6 to 12 months worth of an emergency fund. And they say to have a bigger amount of months as an emergency fund if you own your own business, because there tends to be seasonality when you tend to own your own business. You know, 9 times out of 10, there'll be some months where you get a lot of income, then there'll be a few months where you don't get any income at all. So it's important, if you know you have a mortgage too, if you have rent, that if there's an emergency where there's a really dry spell in your business for longer than expected, that you've got a bigger emergency pot there to fund, you know, your living. But for the majority of people here listening, a 3 to 6 month emergency fund is the goal to have set aside. And it's really important to work out what your monthly needs are, how much that costs, let's say for example 2,000, and then to multiply it by the amount of months of what you'd need and put it in a separate savings account. And as I said, emergency funds are just for emergencies. This is not to save for a holiday. This is not to save for anything fancy down the line, for like a wedding or buying a house. This is completely separate. And I would really recommend to getting a completely separate account for this, because you don't want to be tempted to spend it elsewhere. Cool, thanks guys. That was my video on emergency funds and what they are and how much you should have in yours. If you have any questions, pop them down below. As I said, I'm a really new channel and I'd appreciate your support if you can subscribe. I talk about personal finance and I post 2 videos a week. So if you have any topics that you want me to chat about, just let me know and I'll hopefully get onto them. But yeah, thanks guys. I'll see you soon in the next video. Okay, bye.